Hello and welcome to this course on programmatic advertising. My name is Rohit Uttamchandani. I'm a digital marketing consultant, speaker, and trainer, and I'm really excited to be your trainer for this course. I've been in the digital marketing space for about 6 years now, worked with multiple clients across sectors, helped them craft their digital strategies, scale their online presence. I've managed millions of dollars in advertising spends across various digital advertising channels and platforms. I have a strong passion to speak, so I go around speaking at digital marketing conferences and events across the globe. I also have a strong passion to train, and over the last 4 years, I've trained over 4,000 professionals, including entrepreneurs and senior level marketing executives in digital marketing and strategy. So now that you know a little bit about who I am, let's look at what we will cover in this course. We'll begin with an understanding of what programmatic advertising really is. I'll then take you through the fundamentals of the digital advertising auction, for those of you who are not familiar with it. We'll then look at the different components of the programmatic advertising ecosystem. We'll look at demand-side platforms, supply-side platforms, ad networks, ad exchanges, what they are, and where they fit into the ecosystem. I'll then take you through some terminology that you will keep hearing in the programmatic advertising space. We'll look at frequency cap, above the fold and below the fold inventory, run on network and run on site types of ad buying. We'll look at the most common challenges that are faced by advertisers in the programmatic space. We'll understand brand safety, advertising fraud, and the concept of viewability. We'll then move on to understanding the different types of programmatic advertising. We'll look at open auctions, private auctions, preferred deals, and programmatic guaranteed deals as well. I'll also tell you what are the pros and cons of each type, when you should pick which type of programmatic advertising. I'll also take you through the Google programmatic ecosystem, all the components that are part of it, and what are the functions of each component. We'll look at the difference between programmatic advertising and standard display. What are the advantages and disadvantages of each, and when you should pick one over the other. And then we'll finish with some success stories from brands in the programmatic advertising space that will show you the true power of programmatic advertising. So now that you know what we're going to be talking about, let me take you through why this course will be really important and useful to you, especially if you're a marketer or an advertiser. Well, programmatic advertising is growing at a rapid pace. If you look at the Zenith Media Programmatic Marketing Forecast from 2018, about 65% of digital media spends in 2019 will be programmatic. In fact, in the United States, by the end of 2019, nearly 84% of digital display ad spends will transact programmatically. Programmatic is becoming an increasingly important part of the digital advertising ecosystem. And as a marketer or an advertiser, it is imperative that you fully understand how it works. It's an in-demand skill that will help you take your career to the next level. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. I'm really excited to take you around the world of programmatic advertising, and I look forward to seeing you in the course. Hello and welcome to the first lesson of the programmatic advertising course. I hope you're as excited about this course as I am. In this lesson, we look at what programmatic advertising really is. It may seem like this complex, fancy term that people throw around in conversations to sound a little more intelligent, but in actuality, programmatic advertising is nothing but using technology to buy and sell media. It's just a way of automating the media buying process. Programmatic advertising is marketing, data, and technology working together to make ad buying systems and processes more efficient. The singular objective of programmatic advertising is to help advertisers reach the right audience at the right time, in the right context, and with the right message. As an advertiser, if you can do this, if you can ensure that you're reaching each person you want to reach at the moment that's optimal, and with a message that's personalized for them, your advertising ROI would be at its best. And that's exactly what technology, data, and marketing are working together here to do, to increase the efficiency of your digital advertising and maximize the return on investment or ROI you get from it. So that's in a nutshell what programmatic advertising really is. And we'll look at the ecosystem and how it works in more detail as we go through this course. We'll begin with understanding the fundamentals of the digital advertising auction, especially for those of you who are not familiar with how the auction works. And that's what the next video is all about. So I look forward to seeing you in that one. Welcome back to the course. A good part of digital advertising is bought using auctions. And in this lesson, we'll understand the fundamentals of how digital advertising auctions really work. Now, some of you who already have some knowledge or experience in digital marketing might find this lesson a little basic. You might already know some of this stuff. In that case, you can either skip this lesson to the end, or you can skim through it and watch it at twice the speed to get a quick refresher of the topic. Great, so let's get started and understand how the auction in digital advertising actually works. We'll first look at the Google Ads auction and see how does Google decide which ad to show at which position. So let's go do a Google search. So let's say I want to buy a life insurance plan. So I just go to Google and search for the keyword buy life insurance online. And as you can see, I have 4 ads that have shown up here on the top. And as I scroll below the organic results, I have 3 ads here at the bottom as well. So how does Google decide which ads should show at what position? Well, this happens through the auction. So each advertiser who wants to show up for this particular keyword here would go to their Google Ads dashboards and bid on this keyword. So let's assume that those 4 advertisers are advertisers A, B, C, and D, and they all want to show their ads for that specific keyword. So they would go to their Google Ads dashboard and they would enter how much they're willing to bid for that query. Now every auction has a base price. Even in real life auctions, for those of you who've been to real life auctions or taken part in general auctions where products are being sold, there is always a base price. And here as well, there is a base price for this keyword. So let's assume that this base price, which is set before the bidding begins, is a $5 cost per click. So for every click on that keyword, the minimum that an advertiser would bid would be $5. How is this base price decided? Well, it depends on multiple factors. Most importantly, the competition in the auction. It depends on how many advertisers are going after that keyword and how much are they willing to pay for it. The more advertisers in the auction and the more they are willing to pay for it, the higher the base price would be. So let's say these 4 advertisers have bid $7, $8, $5.50, and $10. So in this case, if the bid was the only thing that was taken into account, it's quite obvious that advertiser D would win the auction and their ad would show right on top. But the Google Ads auction does not take just the bid into account, because in that case, advertisers with deep pockets could buy out smaller advertisers and users would not get the best experience as well. In order to ensure that users get the best experience and users get the most relevant ad to show up for their query, there's another factor that goes into the auction, and that factor is called a quality score. Now, what is a quality score? A quality score is a score on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, that is given to advertisers for every keyword that they are bidding on. How is this quality score calculated? Well, it takes 3 factors into account. It takes the expected click-through rate on an ad, the relevance of the ad to the query being searched for, and the experience that the user would have on the landing page. So going back to our example, let's say advertiser A has a quality score of 3, advertiser B has a quality score of 4, advertiser C has a quality score of 8, and advertiser D has a quality score of 2. Now in this case, the position of the ad, or something called the ad rank, is decided based on both these factors. So ad rank is a combination of the bid that the advertiser has put into the system and the quality score that has been assigned to their keywords in this case, based on the 3 factors that we just discussed. So advertisers who put in a lot more effort to give the user a better experience by making their ads more relevant, by making their landing page experiences better, would have a higher quality score. So in this case here, let's assume the ad rank is a simple multiplier between the bid and the quality score. Though in actuality it's quite complex, but for now, for the sake of simplicity, let's assume that it's a simple multiplier. The ad ranks would then be 21, 32, 44, and 20. Going by the ad rank, the auction would now be won by advertiser C. So an interesting point for you to note here is that although advertiser C had bid the lowest, they still ended up winning the auction. And that's because, like I said earlier, they put in the effort to make their ads more relevant and their landing pages better from a user experience perspective. Let's take another example. This time let's look at a banner ad being sold through a programmatic advertising auction. Let's say you've loaded a site on your laptop and this site has an ad spot there where ads can possibly show. Now there are multiple advertisers there who would want to target you with their products and services. So they would take part in a similar auction to get their ads to show. For this auction, just like any other auction, let's assume that the base price set before the auction begins is a $2 CPM, which is $2 per 1,000 impressions. And let's say there are 4 advertisers, A, B, C, and D, who have their banner ads ready and they want these ads to be shown to you in that ad spot. In order to enter the auction, they would now have to bid over that base price, which is $2 for 1,000 impressions. Let's say advertiser A has bid $2.20, advertiser B has bid $4.80, C has bid $2.80, and D has bid $3.50. Now in this case, who do you think is going to win the auction? Well, it's pretty obvious. Advertiser B, who's bid the highest, would win the auction here, and his ad would end up showing in that ad spot to you. Now the question is, he's won the auction, but how much would the advertiser end up paying? Would he pay $4.80? Would he pay more? Would he pay the base price? How much would he end up paying? The bid that he has set is $4.80, but how much would he end up paying now that the ad has been shown? Well, the answer is he would end up paying $3.51. That's because all digital advertising auctions, including the Google auction that you just saw, are second price auctions. When I say second price auction, it means the winning bidder would pay a price which is one notch above the second highest bidder. In this case here, the second highest bidder is advertiser D, who bid $3.50, and advertiser B, after winning the auction, would pay one notch higher, which is 1 cent higher, and that's how it comes up to $3.51. Like I said, all digital advertising auctions are second price auctions, where the winning advertiser pays a price which is one notch higher than the second highest advertiser. Now this process happens in real time. It happens every time you do a search on Google or every time you load up a site. The auction is taking place in the background at a speed which is faster than the time it takes for you to blink your eye. That's how tech intensive the ecosystem is. So if I go back to my Google search here again and refresh the page, you would see these positions would most likely change. So if you know the positions now, at position 1 we have this advertiser called Policy Bazaar. At position 2 we have an advertiser called ICICI. Position 3 is Altia Birla Capital and 4 is Max Life. So I'm now going to refresh this page. And you saw the positions change. So position 1, which was earlier Policy Bazaar, has now been taken by Altia Birla Capital. And the other 3 positions have changed too. That's because the auctions are happening in real time. Every time you refresh a page, all these advertisers go back to the auction. The entire process takes place. Bids are checked. In this particular case, the quality scores are checked. The ad ranks are recalculated. And the ads then show up. The same thing holds good when you visit a site on the internet. So I've just opened up the Washington Post and you see an ad here. This is an ad that you see on the side. If I refresh this page, so I just refreshed the page, and once I refreshed, all advertisers who wanted to bid for that particular spot would have gone into the auction again, and you can see the ad has now changed. Now, some of you might have a question on the Google Ads auction, which is, well, advertisers won the auction and got their ad to show right on top, but how much would they end up paying? Well, the fundamentals is the same. This is also a second price auction. In this case, the algorithm takes the ad rank and the quality score into account and calculates a normalized bid. And with the normalized bid, the winning bidder would pay one notch higher than the second highest bid. So we've seen a couple of examples, and I hope you guys are now clear with the concept of how digital advertising auctions work. So let's recap some of the key points that we just learned. The first thing is digital advertising auctions are second price auctions. So the winning advertiser pays one notch higher than what the second highest advertiser had bid. They are blind auctions, so advertisers don't know what other advertisers are bidding. So in the examples that I showed you, advertiser A did not know what advertiser B is bidding, B did not know what C is bidding, and C did not know what D was bidding. When it comes to programmatic advertising, the auctions are completely automated. So in this case that you saw, right from the bids to how much should be bid is all done through the system. The bids would be changed in real time as well. So when you refresh pages, the bids that you see here for each advertiser would not remain the same. The system would figure out the best match for that user who's loaded the page and alter the bids accordingly. And last is that these auctions happen in real time. Every time you refresh a page, all advertisers go back to the auction and the system automatically finds the best ad to show. Great, so that's the fundamentals of how digital advertising auctions work. I hope you guys had a great time learning, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Welcome back. Before we dive deeper into programmatic advertising, let's go back to the beginning of time in digital advertising and see what it looked like then. So let's say about 15 years ago, you were an advertiser. Let's take an example. Let's say you were BMW. And you wanted to advertise on the internet to audiences that were there. You made a list of publisher sites that you want to show your ads on. Publishers are websites that have ad space to sell. Let's say one of those publishers that you wanted to advertise on was the Washington Post. How do you think you would have gone about it? Well, the only way to do it was to get in touch with them directly. So you would speak to the people in charge of ad sales at the Washington Post and tell them that you wanted to run a banner ad for BMW on their site. They would revert to you with a proposal that would have different options to advertise on their site with the prices for each option. You would then negotiate with them, try and get the best options at the best price. You would close the deal, finalize the period for which the ad would show. Then a lot of things on the operational front would happen manually. You would have the ad being sent across, tracking tags being shared. It was basically a lot of manual work, right from the stage where you got in touch, to closing the deal, to executing it, to measuring the impact. Everything was being done manually. Apart from all the manual work that went in, what's worse is that you would end up showing your ad to everyone on the Washington Post site without being able to segment it to an audience that you would want to go after. This resulted in a lot of wasted impressions and a lot of time and effort that was being spent by teams on the entire execution process. From this scenario to where digital advertising is today, it's evolved a fair bit. And that's what we'll talk about in the next lesson. See you in that one. Hello and welcome back. Let's dive deeper into the world of programmatic advertising. In the previous lesson, we talked about what digital advertising looked like in the early days. Well, today, it has evolved from being something as simple as this in the beginning to something as complex as this today, with thousands of players in the ecosystem between the advertisers and the publishers, helping match the right ad impression to the right user. There are agencies, demand-side platforms, supply-side platforms, ad networks, ad exchanges, a whole lot of stuff. So let's understand where these fit into the ecosystem. So on one side, you have advertisers, it's people like us who want to show our ads to our target audience, consumers at the other end. In order to reach consumers, we'll have to reach them through the sites and apps that they use online, which is basically what we call publishers. Now, as an advertiser, when you want to buy ad inventory, you would most likely hire an agency that would help you buy and manage your ads across multiple platforms. Now, the left side of this chart is called the demand side because this is where there's a demand for ad impressions. And the right side of the chart is called the supply side because that's where the supply of the impressions are. Now, agencies do not directly buy from publishers in the programmatic scenario. They buy through a platform which is called a demand side platform or a DSP. Now, a DSP is nothing but a tool or a software that helps advertisers or their agencies buy ad inventory that is in sync with their marketing objectives. The simplest and most basic example of a DSP would be the Google Ads platform itself. Because if you think about it, that's where advertisers or agencies go and buy ad impressions, be it search ads, display, or video advertising. A more advanced example of a DSP, which has a lot more features and options for advertisers, is something called DoubleClick Bid Manager or DBM. Now, these names have all changed since July 2018 when Google rebranded all its advertising platforms. So for some of you who are familiar, that's when Google AdWords became Google Ads. And all DoubleClick products had their names changed. So DoubleClick is also owned by Google. And DoubleClick Bid Manager, which is DBM, is today called Google Display and Video 360 or just Google DV360. Don't worry about getting confused between the old and the new names. In a later section, I have some time allocated to getting you familiarized with these platforms, what their old names were and what their new names are. You'd need to know both because these are used interchangeably in the industry even today. So that's the demand side. You have an advertiser who might hire an agency to buy their ad impressions. The agency would then interact with a demand side platform or a DSP, which is nothing but a tool or a software that helps agencies and advertisers buy relevant ad impressions. For smaller advertisers who do not want to hire an agency and pay the agency fees and commissions, they could go directly to DSPs as well. So you have advertisers who use the Google Ads platform directly, for example. Now on the supply side, just like you have a demand side platform for advertisers, you have a supply side platform or an SSP for publishers. So what does a supply side platform do? Well, just like what a DSP does, it helps publishers sell their inventory to advertisers in the most efficient manner possible. When I say efficiency, what I mean is it helps them liquidate most of their ad inventory at the best price possible. Again, the simplest example of an SSP would be Google AdSense, which is where publishers can go and sign up to have their ad inventory sold through Google. So let's say you're a publisher, you have a blog or a website, you want to monetize it by showing ads. You could just go to Google AdSense, sign up, and then Google would start showing ads on your site and pay you a percentage of the revenue that they make. Just like Google Ads works as a great platform for small to mid-sized advertisers and also to an extent for large advertisers, Google AdSense works as a great platform for small to mid-sized publishers. For publishers who are really large, they would need a lot more advanced functionality in the supply-side platform to help them liquidate the massive inventory that they would have at the best price. So an example of a more advanced supply-side platform, one that is used by a large number of publishers across the globe, is DoubleClick for Publishers or DFP. Again, this name has changed as well, and today it's called the Google Ad Manager. Like I said, don't worry about the old and the new names. We'll come back to it at a later point. Now, the demand side and the supply side interact with each other through something called an ad network or an ad exchange. Let's look at ad networks first. Ad networks are basically companies that have a bunch of publishers partnered with them to show ads on their site. A classic example of an ad network is the Google Display Network, or the GDN. As most of you might be aware, the GDN is nothing but a network of sites and apps that have partnered with Google to show Google ads on them. So Google owns the network and shows ads on these publisher sites. Publishers then make a percentage of the revenue. So these ads are sold by publishers through Google AdSense and bought by advertisers through Google Ads. Another example of an ad network, which is quite popular, is the Facebook Audience Network, or the FAN. So these are ad networks, which, like I said, they're companies that have partnered with a whole bunch of publishers to show ads on those publisher sites and apps. The other way in which the demand side and supply side interact is through something called an ad exchange. Ad exchanges tend to be much larger than ad networks. You could have one ad exchange interacting simultaneously with multiple ad networks. Ad exchanges are also more transparent when it comes to their options and the pricing models, because with ad networks, the prices are determined individually by the company that owns it. With ad exchanges, it's more real-time and decided by market dynamics through the auction. A classic example of an ad exchange is the DoubleClick ad exchange, or AdX as it's abbreviated. This is one of the largest ad exchanges globally. And when we come to the Google Programmatic ecosystem in a later section of this course, we'll understand the inventory that the DoubleClick exchange has and the other ad networks and ad exchanges it has partnered with. Great, so that's the programmatic advertising ecosystem for you. Now, one thing I want to clarify for you guys here as advertisers and marketers is that in order to operate a system efficiently, you don't really need to know the nitty-gritty aspects of how the systems work in the backend. To give you an analogy here, I'm sure most of you can drive a car, but if I were to ask you to tell me how the engine really works, most of you wouldn't have clarity on that aspect, but I'm sure you can drive really well. The same thing applies to the programmatic ecosystem as well. The technical side of it can be quite complex, but as advertisers and marketers, you don't really need to understand that side in order to be able to operate it efficiently. All you need to know is have a clear idea of what these components are, what do they do, and where they fit into the ecosystem. And that's what we've done by looking at this flowchart here. I hope you now have more clarity on the basic functioning of the programmatic advertising ecosystem. In later sections, we'll go on to understand some more terms that are spoken in the programmatic advertising space, and we'll also look at the different types of programmatic advertising out there and how you can use them as advertisers. Thank you for being part of the lesson. I hope you had a great time learning, and I will see you in the next one. Welcome back. In this section, we talk about some of the most common terms that you would hear in the programmatic advertising space. But before we get there, a quick recap of what we've covered so far. We've looked at what programmatic advertising really is. We've gone through the fundamentals of the digital advertising auction. We've seen how digital advertising has evolved from the beginning of time to what it is today. And we've also gone through the entire programmatic advertising ecosystem, seen how it works, understood some of the most important components. We've seen DSPs, SSPs, ad networks, ad exchanges, where they fit into the ecosystem, and what function do they perform. We'll now move on to our first term in programmatic advertising, something called a frequency cap. A frequency cap is also used across digital advertising, not just in the programmatic space, but there is one advantage when it comes to programmatic advertising, which we'll talk about at the end of this lesson. Before we go to frequency capping, let's look at what frequency is. This is something some of you who are familiar with digital advertising would already know, so you could consider this as a quick refresher. And for those of you who are new, it's an important topic that you must pay attention to. Frequency is basically the average number of times that your ad has been shown to a unique user, right? So if your ad has been shown 5 times to a single person, the frequency is 5. If it's been shown 8 times to a single person, the frequency is 8. So how is this calculated when you're running ad campaigns reaching a large number of people? Well, frequency, which is generally calculated for a specific time frame, so it could be the frequency over a week, over a month, it could be frequency over a day. This is basically the impressions that have been delivered in that time frame divided by reach in the same period. A quick refresher, impressions are the number of times that your ad has been shown to users, and reach is the number of people or unique users who your ad has been shown to. Impressions are always greater than reach. You will never have a scenario where impressions are less than reach. So take a couple of examples here. Let's say that you ran a campaign, the impressions were 5,000 and you reached 2,500 people. So in this case, the frequency is 2. That's the average frequency. And let's assume this is all over a week. So that's a frequency of 2 over the last week where your ad campaign got you 5,000 impressions and you reached 2,500 people. If the impressions are 3,000 and the reach is 3,000 as well, that means your frequency is 1. This means you reached everyone in the audience just once. Likewise, another example, let's say your campaign delivered 6,000 impressions and reached 1,000 people. In this case, on an average, each person was delivered the ad 6 times. Right? So that's how frequency is calculated. So what's the significance of this metric? Well, it's something that's really important when you're managing campaigns. If you set your frequency too high, you're going to be overexposing your audience. Right? This would result in suboptimal spending of your marketing budget because beyond a point, you're not really going to be influencing your audience anymore. And what's worse is you could even annoy them. Nobody likes seeing the same ad too many times. And if you overexpose them, your ads could end up having detrimental effect as well. And as an advertiser, you wouldn't want that to happen. You would want to show the ad to your users an optimal number of times, which is just enough to drive recall for you. Right? Because if you show your ads infrequently or where the frequency is too low, then the opposite would happen. You would underexpose your audience and this would not drive strong enough recall and visibility for you. Which is where, like I said, the frequency needs to be optimal. And that's where a frequency cap comes in. Setting a frequency cap helps you limit your ad exposure to whatever you want. Right? So how do you figure out what this optimal frequency is? Well, the best way to find the optimal frequency is to test different frequency values over a certain time period against your desired marketing outcome. So the outcome could be a lift in brand recall, a lift in sales. You would test different frequencies and see if you're meeting your end objective. So are you getting the conversions you want? Are you able to generate the brand recall that you want? That's how you would go about it. A lot of people ask me if there is a fixed frequency that they should go after, or is there a simple chart to follow saying that, well, I should set a frequency cap to 5 per week or 2 per day or 25 in a month. Well, honestly, it varies widely from brand to brand, business to business, and marketing objective that you want to go after. So the best way, honestly, to go about it is to test. When it comes to testing, I have a great framework here for you that you can keep in mind when you're testing different frequencies. It's a great frequency factors chart, which has been published by Facebook Ads. It's one of the most clear and concise frameworks that I've seen when it comes to planning your frequency cap. So this chart gives you multiple factors to look at when you're deciding or testing your frequency caps. The first bunch of factors is what we call market factors. So let's say you're an established brand, a brand that's been around for ages, you've got a large market share, you've got a high share of voice. In this case, you would rather use a low frequency because you already have a fair bit of brand recall and you don't want to overexpose your audience or waste your budget by reaching people who already remember you well enough. On the other hand, let's say you're a new brand, you just started out, you don't have the kind of share of voice that a bigger brand has. In this case, you would need to test higher frequency caps for the same time period. So market factors are one. The other is what we call message factors. So think about your ad messaging. If your message is unique and not very complex, fairly easy to understand, then a lower exposure would do, because if people see the message once or twice, they would get it. On the other side, if you got an ad messaging that's new, that's not really unique, that's quite complex to understand, you might need to plan a higher cap, because people would take time to figure out your message and then remember what you're trying to say. The last one is media factors. So you look at your campaign duration, for example. Is it a campaign that you're planning to run for a long, long time? Are you going to run this campaign for the next 3 months with similar messaging? Then you might want to keep your caps lower, because in this case, over time, the exposure would be high. So when the weekly cap would be low, if you look at the overall exposure over the 3-month duration of your campaign, it would be enough for you to drive the right amount of recall. Likewise, if you're using multiple channels, so let's say you're doing ads across different publishers, different networks, then you might want to have a lower frequency across all, because you're going to have multiple touch points with your audience and you're going to be exposing your ads to them across different media. On the other hand, if your campaign duration is short, let's say it's a short burst campaign, you've got a launch and you're doing a campaign just for 3 days, or you got an offer and you're running a campaign just for those 3 days prior to the offer, then you would use higher frequency caps. Right? So this is a great framework to use when you're planning your frequency caps. Keep these in mind and test your frequency, find what works best for specific brands and specific scenarios. Now, when it comes to programmatic advertising, a big advantage that advertisers have is you can use something called a global frequency cap, which you can set across publishers and networks. With normal display advertising, you would not be able to do this. Let's say you're running ads on Google AdWords, which is now Google Ads, or on Facebook, and a bunch of other platforms. You can set individual frequencies on each platform, right? You can control your frequencies separately on Google, separately on Facebook, separately on, let's say, Yahoo or on LinkedIn, but you can't really control the frequency or the exposure globally. With programmatic advertising, it makes your life much easier as an advertiser, because now you can control frequency across platforms. So you can work with multiple publishers, multiple ad networks, and set a global frequency cap saying that, well, the moment my frequency cap of, let's say, 3 is hit, I want my ads to stop showing to that user across all networks. So that's frequency cap. Like I said, it's a common term that you'd hear in the programmatic space, also use it quite often. And it's important to understand what it is, how do you go about setting the right frequency caps, and what is the advantage with frequency capping when it comes to programmatic advertising. Great, so that's all about frequency cap. Hope you had a fun time learning this concept, and I will see you in the next one. We're talking about programmatic advertising terminology, and in this lesson, we'll look at first, second, and third party data. These are common terms that you will hear across the programmatic advertising industry, and you must know what they are. Let's start with first party data. So what is first party data? It is basically data that a brand owns. So what does that mean? Let's look at some examples. Customer databases are an example of first party data. So your customer email IDs, mobile numbers that you've collected over time. This is data that you own. You know how you've collected them. You know where it came from. Another example is data from your CRM software. This could be your customer purchase data, which customers have higher transaction volumes, how frequently do they make a purchase. All of this is again data that you own, and it's first party data. Data of your app users is another example. People who use your app, people who use your app less frequently, people who use it more frequently, people who make purchases in the app. Another example is people who visited your website, and you're able to track those visitors and remarket to them later. You can even use this data to build audiences similar to your existing customers. Another example of first party data is people who watched your video. Let's say all the people who watched your video on YouTube, you own the data and you could target them with another video. All the people who watched a certain video on Facebook, you could target them with another video. So you own all this data. It's been created through your marketing activities, through the various activities that your business does. This is extremely valuable data, and as a brand, it's really important that you capture every data point that you can. Of course, at the same time, ensuring that you comply with data privacy regulations. One of the most powerful ways of using first-party data, apart from just remarketing to your existing customers or reaching out to them and re-engaging them, is something called lookalike modeling, or like I said earlier, using the capabilities in different advertising platforms to build audiences that are similar to your existing customers. These similar audiences can then be very effective in helping you achieve your business objective. So that's first party data. Let's look at the second type, which is second party data. So what is second party data? It is data that is shared by a partner. Let me explain this with an example. Let's take an airline here, any airline that has a frequent flyer program and wants to promote it. And let's take a bank that wants to promote their travel credit card. Now, the target audience for these two companies would have some degree of overlap. So they could then agree to do some kind of a cross promotion where the airline would tell the bank that they would advertise to existing customers of the travel credit card. And the bank would in turn advertise to existing members of the frequent flyer program. So this type of data sharing is called second party data. When you partner with someone and use their data for your marketing and advertising purposes, it's called second party data. Here you know where the data came from, you know it's from a credible source, and you can trust it. The third type of data is something called third party data. This is basically data collected by a third party, just as the name indicates. Let's look at some examples of this to understand what this really is. Let's say you purchased a database from a vendor. Now you have no clue how the vendor collected that data. You have very little information on the quality of the data. So this is an example of data that's been collected by a third party, and you don't really have a clear idea of how the data was collected. Another example of third party data is your Google Ads audience data. So when you run display ads on the Google Ads platform, you have various audiences that you can target. For example, you can target audiences who are interested in a certain topic, audiences who have an affinity for a certain category, audiences who are in the market for a certain product or service. Now again, in this case, these are audiences that have been built by Google based on the data that Google has collected. Google does give you some idea on how they've collected the data, but you don't have a clear picture of how those audiences are actually built. This is another example of third-party data. Only difference here is because Google is an extremely credible player in the online advertising ecosystem, you would trust their data much more than you would trust data from, let's say, something you purchased from a random vendor. Another example of third-party data is data collected by something called DMPs, or data management platforms. So data management platforms are companies that collect data from multiple sources, put it together, process it, segment it, and then package it into specific buckets that can be bought by advertisers. Now on programmatic advertising platforms, you have access to buy third-party data from data management platforms. You can't do this with Google Ads. In fact, this is something we'll also talk about in a later lesson. The key advantage of programmatic advertising is that you have access to a lot of third-party data. Now, not every third-party data set might be reliable or credible, but it's up to you to ensure you target third-party data sets from more reliable data management platforms. Some of the more reliable data management platforms are BlueKai, which is owned by Oracle, Lotame, Adobe Audience Manager, and the Google Audience Center 360. So when you buy data from DMPs, ensure that the DMP is credible and you can trust that the third-party data would be worth targeting in campaigns that you're running. Using credible third-party audience data can help you reach out to newer audiences through programmatic platforms who you might not be able to really reach otherwise. Great, so we've seen the three different types of data. We've looked at first, second, and third-party data, understood what they are, and looked at examples of each. I hope you're now clear with this concept, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. We've been discussing programmatic advertising terminology, and in this lesson, we talk about four terms: ATF and BTF, and RON and ROS. Now, there's this old joke that programmatic advertising is full of what we call TLAs, or three-letter acronyms. You'll keep seeing a lot of these in the programmatic space, so There's DSPs, SSPs, RON, ROS, ATF, BDF, there's RTB, DBM, DMP, DFP, DCM. Well, sounds like a mouthful and it might get a little overwhelming when you're just starting out in programmatic. But don't worry, by the end of this course, you'll be more comfortable with all these TLAs. And as you get into the programmatic space yourself, after a point, you'll just get very comfortable with all of them. And these are just a few that you see on the screen. There are a lot more that we'll keep talking about as we go along. I will also include a resource for you, which would be a ready reckoner of all these TLAs in one place towards the end of the course. So let's look at ATF and BTF first. These are common terms that you would see when you're in the programmatic space. You'd see these in proposals, you'd see these in reports. So let's look at what this really means. Let's look at this publisher site here. Now above the fold or ATF refers to the area on the screen that you see when you load a site. So when you first load a site, the area that you see on the screen here, this is what we call above the fold. And all the ads that would show in this area is called above the fold inventory or ATF inventory. So in this case, the ad that you're seeing here on the top left corner from HostGator and this ad that you're seeing here for this live webinar are above the fold ads. Likewise with this ad here which says become a sub-broker. So these ads are all above the fold. As I scroll below, there's this ad here from LinkedIn which says introducing video ads, which I'm getting targeted for because it's relevant to me. So this ad was just at the fold. And then as you keep scrolling below, you'll see more ads as well. So let's keep scrolling. Here you see this ad here. So this ad is below the fold. In fact, this is me getting remarketed for something I'd searched for. If you guys remember in the session on digital advertising auction fundamentals, I searched for life insurance plans. And I accidentally happened to click on one of those links at that point. And now I'm getting retargeted or remarketed here. So this is an ad that's below the fold. Likewise, this ad that you see here, this is also a below the fold ad. So when you're buying ad inventory that is above the fold and just at or below the fold is inventory that's considered much more valuable. Inventory that is below the fold, and the more and more below the fold you go, the less valuable the inventory becomes. So that's something to keep in mind when you're buying inventory, is to check whether it's above the fold or below the fold. And if you specifically want above the fold inventory, you can mention that while buying your ads as well. Moving on to RON and ROS, which are types of ad buying. ROS or run of site is an ad buying option where your ad placements would appear on any pages of a target site. So on the site that you just saw, which was moneycontrol.com, if I buy ads from them on an ROS model, that means my ads could show on any page of their site and any position on those pages. Right? I don't control which pages I want to show my ads on. If I want to show my ad only on their homepage, then I would choose a different ad buying option. I would not choose an ROS option. RON, on the other hand, is run of network. This is an ad buying option in which your ad placements would appear on a wide collection of sites in a specific ad network without having the ability to choose specific sites. So to give you an example, let's say you're running ads on the Google Display Network and you're targeting a specific audience. Let's say you're targeting an audience age 25 to 45 in California who is in the market for a new car. Your ads would show to that audience anywhere and everywhere on the network where the audience is present. Likewise, with different ad networks, they might give you an RON option saying you could run ads across our network and reach specific audiences without having to worry about choosing specific sites. So these are different options. You would choose these options depending on the objective of the campaign that you're running at that point. In some cases, you might choose RON. In some cases, you might choose ROS. In some cases, you might not choose any of these, and you might choose to advertise only on specific areas of a specific site. So that's the end of this lesson. I hope you're now clear on what above the fold and below the fold is and what run of site and run of network types of ad buying are. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Hello and welcome to this lesson on brand safety. Brand safety has been a key concern for marketers and advertisers today. especially when it comes to programmatic advertising. So what really is brand safety? Well, brand safety is ensuring that an online ad does not appear in a context that could potentially damage the advertiser's brand. In a recent study done by the Integral Ad Science, which is one of the most credible companies in the programmatic advertising space, they found that over 40% of display ad impressions on desktops served next to violent content, and about 18% of impressions served next to adult content. Now, as brands, you don't want your ads to show in environments that are not congenial to your brand. These are not just limited to violent and adult content, but there's a whole list of toxic content categories that a brand would not want to associate itself with. It could be content around military conflict, obscenity, illegal drugs, adult content, content around weaponry and arms, hate speech, crime, terrorism, and other spammy and harmful sites. In the recent past, especially over the last couple of years, there's been a spurt in the number of reported incidents of brand ads being shown next to content which brands would not want themselves to be associated with. Just Google for brand safety examples and you'll find a whole bunch of them. I've just pulled up some to show you which are safe to show in a course. So this is an example of a brand ad showing on a YouTube video from Combat 18, which is a violent pro-Nazi group. Here's another example. This is from Walmart, where we have Walmart's ad showing on a video of this organization called the Animal Liberation Front, which is an extremist organization that goes to the extent of killing humans to protect animals. Another problem with ads like these, apart from the fact that the brand would not want to associate themselves with this content, is that to a lot of users it might appear that Walmart is endorsing this group. And that's not something the brand would want. Not just that, since Walmart is paying YouTube for this ad, and YouTube is going to share that revenue with the video on which the ad was displayed, indirectly Walmart is also helping the extremist group to monetize. And most brands, like I said, would not want to do this. You can find a whole lot of examples. This is another one. This is an ad for this brand called Sandals, which is a luxury holiday operator appearing on a video that is promoting jihadists. Another one, this is an ad for The Guardian in a content environment which is not the most ideal. So brand safety is a serious concern for marketers, and of late YouTube has been under the scanner for a lot of this video content on the platform where brands' ads have been showing. In fact, some big advertisers in the United States like Verizon, AT&T, and Johnson & Johnson also pulled their ads from YouTube for a while over the content environment that their ads were showing in. These are all news articles that have been published in leading online publishers, and I will share the links to these articles in the resources section of this lesson, so you can check them out and read them yourselves as well. This is another article, which is from end 2017, where in the UK, brands found that their ads were showing on video sexualizing kids, and this caused a good number of brands, including Adidas and Deutsche Bank, to pull out as well. This was reported in the Times in the UK too. Well, some of you might be wondering, why isn't YouTube pulling down this content in the first place? Well, YouTube is doing its best to do that, but it's not always possible at the scale at which YouTube is to police every video that comes in, and especially when some videos are subjective, because what might seem extremist to me might not seem extremist to somebody else. In cases where the content is subjective, policing it becomes all the more difficult. It's much easier to remove content that's explicit, adult content that has nudity, because that can even be done through advanced artificial intelligence algorithms. But content that is, like I said, subjective becomes quite difficult to police, though YouTube is doing its best to at least not help these channels monetize. In fact, in response to these brand safety concerns that advertisers had raised, YouTube had changed its monetization guidelines for publishers on the platform, where starting last year, publishers would need to have at least 1,000 subscribers on their channel and 4,000 hours of watch time a year. It's not just YouTube, but as recent as about a couple of weeks back, advertisers found their ads on Instagram showing against content that was connected to or promoting suicide. This was reported across the media as well, and I'll share this article too in the resources section so you can go and take a look. Apart from these cases, there could also be very subtle cases where brands would not want their ads to show. For example, it could be a news site where there's a report of a car crash, and next to that you have an ad for a Honda car. That's not going to be ideal. You don't want to see an ad to buy a car on a page that's talking about a car crash. Now, brand safety is a major problem, especially with programmatic buys and open auction programmatic buys. The reason I'm explaining this concept now is because when we move on to types of programmatic advertising in a later session, I will talk about the open auction type. And because the open auction type allows advertisers to go after audiences anywhere on the internet, irrespective of what site they are, brand safety becomes a major problem. In the lesson where we talk about the pros and cons of each type of programmatic advertising, and we talk about the disadvantages of the open auction, brand safety is a key disadvantage there. So I'll come back to this in that lesson and talk about this challenge. But for now, it's important for you to understand the concept of brand safety and why it has become a key concern for advertisers today. In order to help advertisers tackle this challenge, there are some platforms and tools out there that help verify brand safety, help in verifying if your ads showed in the right places. Of course, this would be after the fact, but at least you would know and you can take corrective action for the future. So they also categorize sites based on their brand safety risk, and you could choose to avoid sites where the risk is high or moderate. So these are two tools that you can use. So I'd suggest you go to their websites, check them out, see what they do. The first one is Double Verify, the second one is Integral Ad Science. So that brings us to the end of this lesson on brand safety. Hope you're now clear with that concept, and I will see you guys in the next video. Welcome back. Apart from brand safety, which we covered in the last lesson, another important topic that you need to understand is ad fraud and bot traffic, sometimes also called NHT. So that's another three-letter acronym that you need to remember. NHT is non-human traffic. It's also called IVT sometimes, which is invalid traffic. So you can remember both those terms. NHT, which is non-human traffic, and IVT, which is invalid traffic. So let's begin with what is ad fraud in the first place. Well, ad fraud causes advertisers to pay for fake, worthless traffic. So where does this fake, worthless traffic come from? It comes from bots. And as most of you might be aware, bots are computer programs that mimic human actions on the internet. Now, most of you would be surprised to know that over 50% of internet traffic is bots. And this is from the Incapsula Bot Traffic Report 2016, which analyzed data from over 16.5 billion visits to about 100,000 randomly selected domains on their network. There are multiple reports that have been published with similar stats where it states anywhere between 40 to 50% of web traffic is bots. Now, if you look at the chart there, you've got something called good bots and bad bots. So what are these good bots? Good bots are bots that make the internet a better place. So Google search engine bot, for example. So how do you think Google shows you the best results from websites across the internet? Do you think they have somebody sitting and reading all that stuff out there? Well, it's all done by their bots, which go around crawling every website on the internet, indexing it, and then giving you the best results. So similar to Google search engine bot, there are a whole bunch of bots out there that help making our lives on the internet easier. The remaining bots, or the bad bots, are basically all those impersonators, scrapers, spammers, and hackers that try and gather information for harmful reasons. So these are the bots that are responsible for all that online fraud that happens. If you look at the numbers, in 2017, about $14 billion was lost to ad fraud. And it's estimated that by 2022, about $44 billion of advertiser money would be lost to the ad fraud industry. Now that's massive, and it's a big problem at hand. Again, if you look at ad fraud, it's been covered in the mainstream media as well. This is an article from CNBC talking about the amount of money being wasted on fake websites and fraudulent ad networks. In fact, just a couple of months back, the United States and the UK have joined up to tackle ad fraud, which they see growing into a $50 billion problem. But so a lot of you might be wondering, how does this ad fraud thing work? What exactly happens? So I'm going to show you how this really works and how does it happen. So the first step in creating ad fraud is turning on a fake website. So what these hackers and spamsters do is create websites that are fake. They then get their websites listed on ad exchanges and networks so that their websites would now be eligible to show ads. Note that these ad exchanges would be smaller ones and not the large ones, because the larger and the credible ones have a whole long list of guidelines before they take on a site. For example, if you want to join the Google Display Network, you have to meet their site monetization guidelines. So these spamsters would go on and join smaller ad networks and ad exchanges, and there are thousands of them out there, especially in the programmatic ecosystem. So once they've created a fake website and joined an ad network or an ad exchange, they now get to load ads on their site. Once ads start showing on their site, they would need users to view those ads, right? Only when ads are viewed and ads are clicked would they make money. So how do they get these viewers? Well, they use bots. So these bots now view those websites and result in those ad impressions being triggered. Now let's assume that the exchange pays them a $5 CPM for all the ad impressions they generated, and it probably cost them 50 cents to $1 to drive that bot traffic to their site. They would then pocket the difference, which is $4. So I'll repeat the process so it becomes clear again. So these hackers turn on fake websites, get those fake websites to join ad networks and exchanges. So now these sites are eligible to show ads. Ads start showing on those sites. They then buy bot traffic, let's say at a $1 CPM. These bots view those ads. Since the ads are being viewed, the ad exchange would pay them, let's say, a $5 CPM, and they would then pocket the difference and make a profit on it. So they spent $1 to get the traffic, earn $5 on the impressions, $4 is their profit, which is about 80% operating margin. Right? So this is just a simple flowchart to help you understand how this really works. It's actually much more complex than this. In fact, in the following lesson, I will show you some of the largest ad frauds that have happened in the last few years, and you'd see how complex it can actually get. But before we get there, I want you guys to watch this really interesting video created by the team at Integral Ad Science, which shows you a real-time bot demo, and it'll give you a better understanding of how these bots view ads and how ad fraud really happens. So in your next lesson, I've shared the link to this video. You guys can watch this video, and once you come back, we'll discuss this and look at ad fraud in more detail. See you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome back. Hope you guys enjoyed watching that video on the live bot demonstration. So in the video, he infects one laptop with a bot and then uses another laptop to monitor the bot's activities. And you could see how the bot was viewing ads that were meant to be shown to human beings. And in a short period of time, it had viewed thousands of ads. So you can imagine what millions of bots could possibly do. One of the largest ad fraud scams to date has been the meth bot scam, which hit in December 2016. This was covered widely in the mainstream media, as hackers made about $5 million a day by faking about 300 million video views, and they stole about $180 million in online ads. Again, I'll share the links to these articles in the resources section of this lesson. Now, $3 to $5 million in fraudulent digital ad revenue per day is massive. So how did they manage to do this? Well, here's the modus operandi. The hackers first created about 6,000 domains. If you remember the flowchart that we discussed sometime back in the course, where we talked about how ad fraud works, you'd see the fundamental process is pretty much the same. Right? So after they created these domains, they then created about 250,000 distinct URLs and made them appear that they belong to prestigious publishers like ESPN or Vogue. This is something we call domain spoofing in the industry, where you use technology to make a domain or a URL appear to belong to another publisher. Next, they set up fraud farms to produce fake traffic from more than 500,000 bots, which watched about 300 million video ads per day, the average payout being $13 per thousand fake views. This was a fairly sophisticated operation done at scale, and in order to bypass anti-fraud detection mechanisms, they obtained hundreds of thousands of IP addresses, associating them with major United States providers, making them look like they come from American households. This is a classic example of how sophisticated these ad fraud operations have become. Another large scam to hit recently, in October 2017, was the Sportbot scam, which affected most of the top sports sites across the globe and cost advertisers about $250 million. So why does ad fraud exist in the first place? It's out in the open, it's being covered in the mainstream media, people talk about it. So why is no one doing anything about it? And why is it a problem that just seems to be growing? Well, the biggest reason is the open nature of programmatic advertising marketplaces. We talked about the programmatic ecosystem. We said there are thousands of ad networks, ad exchanges, demand and supply side platforms where impressions are bought and sold. The ecosystem is massive and there's a lot of money being spent there. As per eMarketer, about $280 billion was spent on digital advertising in 2018. With such a large ecosystem and so much money being spent, we'd expect some regulation, but unfortunately, as of today, the entire programmatic ecosystem is completely unregulated, and this is what is helping driving the growth of ad fraud. Another equally important reason why ad fraud exists and is growing today is that it is technically not illegal in any country. That's why a lot of the mafia across the globe has started indulging in ad fraud. However, as ad fraud has been growing to massive numbers of late, impacting the entire ecosystem, and the money that is being generated is being used by the mafia to fund other illegal activities, a lot of countries have started taking note. In fact, an article that I showed you earlier talked about how the United States and the UK governments are coming together to combat ad fraud in 2019. So we should see things improve over time. Another reason that ad fraud continues to exist is that most digital marketers are completely unaware of how the ad fraud economy really works. And I can tell you this out of pure personal experience because I train a lot of digital marketers across the globe. And those who are aware are driven by misaligned incentives across the entire supply chain, leading to inertia and passive treatment of the problem. For years in the digital advertising ecosystem, brands have focused on measuring the wrong metrics, measuring clicks, impressions, click-through rates, which are not really business metrics. Of late, this trend is changing and brands today are measuring sales, conversions, and brand recall. But for a long time, employee incentives were linked to the amount of traffic they would get or the click-through rates they would drive on their ads, which is why most of the digital marketers who were aware of this didn't really want to take it up because they were still getting their traffic, they were still getting their incentives. However, this is changing as well, and a lot of brands today are focusing more on metrics that impact the business, like sales and brand recall, and incentives are being aligned to these business metrics as well. So now that we've looked at why ad fraud exists in the first place, let's see how we can detect and prevent ad fraud. In the early days of ad fraud, detecting it was much easier. All you needed to do was go to your Google Analytics reports and look for traffic sources that had a time on site of 1 second or a bounce rate of 100%. And you would know that those sources were driving bot traffic. Of late though, bots have become much smarter. Today you have bots that mimic human behavior on a page. They scroll pages, they click around, they can sign up for email newsletters, and they can even make calls. In fact, of late, I had a client where we ran a massive campaign for them. They got a few hundred calls, and a lot of their calls, almost about 90% from one particular source, had a duration of just about a second. So the moment the call was answered, the line immediately got cut. So how do we combat fraudsters and bots that are becoming smarter and smarter by the day? Well, here are a couple of things that as an advertiser you can do. First thing is stick to trusted ad networks and exchanges. Like I said, in the programmatic ecosystem, there are thousands of ad networks, ad exchanges. Stick to the ones that you trust, stick to the ones that are more credible. Take references from people you know in the industry, see what's worked, and stick to the top ones. Avoid working with smaller exchanges and networks that you're not really sure of how they're getting their traffic. Next is to monitor your campaigns closely with a lot of advanced analytics tools. That way you'd know if a certain traffic source is bots or real human beings. Move to measuring more actionable metrics like conversions and leads, not just clicks or click-through rates. Because though bots may view ads, click on them, might even fill forms, they wouldn't really buy your product. So look at the quality of conversions you're getting from different traffic sources and take action based on that. If you're doing digital advertising and programmatic advertising at scale, you would need to use advanced ad fraud verification tools like the IAS, White Ops, or Pixelate. These would help you figure out which ad networks and exchanges to work with, and also detect if any of your traffic sources have been affected by bots. You can then pause those networks and prevent more money from going down the drain. Great guys, so I hope you're much more informed on how ad fraud works, what you can do to detect and prevent it. In the next lesson, we'll talk about another digital advertising challenge, which is ad viewability. See you in that one. Welcome to the lesson on viewability. Let me explain the concept of viewability with an example. Let's say I loaded this publisher page, scrolled a little, found an article that I wanted to read, clicked on that article, and left the page. Now on this page below where I clicked on this article, there are multiple ads. This one, for example. Now when this advertiser looks at their ad reports, would this impression for their ad be counted? Think about it. What do you think? Would this impression be counted even though it had never come into my view? I loaded the page, I came here, clicked on article and left. This ad was way below. Would the impression be counted? Well, the answer is yes. It might sound ridiculous, but yes. All the ads on this page that were triggered the moment I loaded this page would have the impression counts go up by 1. That's how impressions are measured in digital advertising. So if you look at your reports for digital ad and if you see 100,000 impressions, well, that doesn't mean that the ad even came into view. It could very well be that the ad did not come into view at all and the impression was still counted. In fact, a very interesting statistic published by eMarketer and AppNexus recently states that about 46% of all digital advertising is never seen. That's massive. And that's exactly why viewability of ads is a big pain point for marketers. For a long time, we looked at our impression reports, and a lot of us thought that our ads were being shown that many times to people. Well, they were being served, yes, but were they being seen? That we had no clue. In order to make impression measurement better for marketers and advertisers, the digital advertising industry came up with its definitions for something called viewability. So when is an ad viewable, or when would an impression be counted as a viewable impression? Well, there are standard definitions for it. So for a banner ad, the ad is considered viewable when at least 50% of the ad's pixels are in view for at least 1 second. I'll repeat that. At least 50% of the ad's pixels or the ad's area is in view for at least 1 second. When it's a video ad, the definition changes a little bit. Here 50% of the video's pixels or the area needs to be in view and playing for at least 2 seconds. If these conditions are met, the impression becomes a viewable impression. So at least you know that your ads have been shown and this many impressions have been delivered as per these definitions. Let me give you an example of a viewability report from Google Ads. So those of you who work on Google Ads or run Google Ads can go to your Google Ads dashboard, go to your display or video campaigns, modify your columns and add these columns for viewable impressions, non-viewable impressions, viewable rate and viewable CPM. You look at what percentage of your ads actually met the globally accepted definition of viewability that we just discussed. So if you look at my campaigns here, I've blurred out the campaign names for client confidentiality reasons. If you look at the first campaign, 60 million impressions were delivered, out of which only 21 million met with the definition of viewability. The rest did not. There's also a column for measurable impressions and non-measurable impressions. So if 21 million impressions met the definition of viewability, that means the balance, which is 60 minus 21, which is about 39 million impressions, should have been non-viewable. However, this number is only about 23 million. Why is that? That's because there are two more columns here. One which says measurable impressions and one which says non-measurable impressions. Measurable impressions imply partner sites, in this case on the Google Display Network, where they are open to having their viewability measured. About 15 million impressions were on sites where viewability could not even be measured. So out of the measurable impressions, which were 44 million, 21 million were viewable and 23 million were non-viewable. You can also see what was the viewable rate. It says 47%. That's because it takes the viewable impressions as a percentage of the measurable impressions. If you take the viewable impressions as a percentage of the total impressions, this number would be even lower. So you can imagine these are ads served on the Google Display Network through the Google Ads platform, and even here barely half the impressions were actually viewed as per the definition of viewability. If you look at the CPM, you can see a difference in the CPM as well. The average CPM, or the cost per 1,000 impressions, was 28 in this case, while the viewable CPM, taking into account the viewable impressions, was 54. So that's a good amount of money being spent on ads that are not even coming into the user's view. So again, for those of you who are running Google Ads campaigns or working with Google Ads, I suggest you go and test this out on your own campaigns and you'd see the numbers, and some of you are going to be surprised at the amount of money you'd spent on impressions that were never in view. A very interesting resource that I wanted to share with you is this Measuring Ad Viewability report published on the Think with Google site. I'll share the link with you in the resources to this lesson. It's a very comprehensive resource on understanding viewability. It's got a very interactive demo as well to check how viewability works. So if you look at the demo, it shows you viewability in action. So if I scroll below, it shows me a site with ads on it. So the moment the ad turns green, it meets the definition of viewability. So as I scroll, you can see this timer that has come on top here. There are 4 ads on this page. This is the first banner ad that you see, which was right above the fold. So it says here, if you're seeing green, the ad is in view. A display ad is considered viewable if 50% of the ad's pixels are in view for at least 1 second. So here we've been viewing this ad for the last 36 seconds and counting. You can see the timer here. It's running live. And the ad is 100% in view. As I scroll below, that's the second ad coming in view now. You can see that's ad 2. It's now 38% in view, as you can see there. So it's not yet viewable. The moment I scroll further, it's now 74% in view for more than 1 second. It now turned viewable. Right, so this was the second ad. So it says the most viewable position is right above the fold, not at the top of the page. Think about it. That's a very interesting insight. When you load a website, right at the top of the page, which is this one, might not be the best position because you might load the page and quickly scroll below. But this position, which is just at the fold, is a position that would be probably the most viewable. As I scroll below, so we've seen 2 banner ads so far, and we've viewed both of them. Next, this is another ad that's come into view. It says 13% in view. If I scroll below, it's now 28% in view, 43% now. And now, the moment it was more than 50% in view for more than 1 second, it became viewable. And as it says, you can look at the insight here as well. It says vertical units are the most viewable ad sizes as they stay on the screen longer. Then as we scroll below, there's a video now at the bottom. This is a video ad format, which is now 10% in view. If I quickly scroll past the video, you see that? I quickly scroll past it because the time was less than 2 seconds. Even though it was 100% in view at some point, it did not count. So I scroll back up, again quickly scroll past, You see it says 10% in view for 0.1 second. If I scroll and scroll back again, you see it says 7% in view for 0.9 seconds. Until it hits the 2-second counter for a video, the viewable impression number will not go up. So now when I scroll up, you can see the moment it hit 2 seconds, it became viewable. Right? So as it says, video ads are considered viewable if 50% of the video ad is in view and playing for at least 2 seconds. Right? So this is a great viewability demo tool. I suggest you guys go around and play with it. That will help you understand viewability better. Apart from this real-time viewability demo, there's also an interesting section in this report which talks about the state of ad viewability. So they conducted research using their measurement technology to understand what drives viewability around the world. And if you click on this, it will take you to this state of ad viewability page where you can look at viewability across any country that's listed here. So if I want to look at the current viewability benchmarks in the United States, it says for YouTube ads it's 94%, web and app video ads is 66%, and display ads, the benchmark is 49%. So if you're in the United States and your display ads have a viewability of 49%, you know you're at the benchmark because that's what is the current state in the United States. Likewise, let's say you're in Europe and you want to check for, let's say, the UK. You can see here it says 94% on YouTube, 50% for display, and 67% for web and app video. Let's say you're in the Middle East, you could do the same thing for 3 countries available here. So in the UAE, you can look at your benchmarks. If you're in APAC, again, you can look at, let's say, India, and you can see what the benchmarks are here. You can also look at what categories have the highest viewability rates. So it says that categories that create captivating content have higher viewability. You can look at which categories have the highest display and ad viewability rates. And it also tells you what you can do to create more viewable ads. Talks about optimizing for mobile devices, using ad sizes that have highest viewability. So you can take a look at which ad sizes have the highest viewability rates for video as well as for display, and focus more on those sizes. And it also tells you or gives you an interesting insight on ads being viewable below the fold as well. So this is the fold. You can see the screen fold here. Just below the fold is where a good chunk of inventory is viewable as well. So it's not that you want to pick only above the fold inventory. You could even experiment with below the fold inventory because even below the fold inventory has a viewability rate of about 47%. Great guys, so that's an awesome resource on viewability. Go ahead and explore it. I will see you guys in the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson on deal ID. So what is a deal ID? A deal ID or a deal identifier is the unique number of an automated ad buy in the programmatic advertising ecosystem. It's a unique code that matches buyers with sellers individually based on a variety of criteria that they've negotiated beforehand. The criteria could include the minimum price the advertisers are looking to bid, type of ad units they bought, which section of the site the ads would show on, amongst a bunch of other things. The reason we are discussing deal ID here is because it is used in 3 types of programmatic advertising. It's used in private auctions, preferred deals, and programmatic guaranteed deals as well. In the next section, when we talk about the different types of programmatic advertising, you'll understand how this deal ID fits into the scheme of things. So that's in a nutshell what deal ID is. Thank you, and I will see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome back. Let's dive deeper into programmatic advertising. Before we go further, this is what we've covered so far, just a quick recap. We began with understanding what programmatic advertising is. We looked at the fundamentals of the digital advertising auction, how digital advertising has evolved over time. We then went through the entire programmatic advertising ecosystem, understood each component. We looked at DSPs, SSPs, ad networks, and ad exchanges, and learned what their role is in the ecosystem. We then understood various programmatic advertising terminology. We looked at frequency cap, above the fold and below the fold inventory, run-off site and run-off network types of ad buying. We also looked at important concepts of brand safety, ad fraud, and viewability as well. In this lesson, we'll look at the 4 different types of programmatic advertising. The first type is something called the open auction. It's also sometimes called RTB, which is real-time bidding. The second type is a private auction, sometimes called a PMP, which is a private marketplace, or an IOA, which is an invitation-only auction. So I'll repeat that. PMP is private marketplace, and IOA is invitation-only auction. That's a few more 3-letter acronyms or TLAs for you to remember. Then we've got preferred deals, sometimes just called PD, or sometimes also referred to as UFR, which is unreserved fixed rate. And then we've got programmatic guaranteed deals, which most of the time are just referred to as PG deals. So let's look at each one of these, understand what they are. The first one is the open auction or RTB, which is real-time bidding. We've already discussed how digital advertising auctions work in an earlier lesson. What happens in this case is a user visits a site. The website has inventory available. The website then communicates with its SSP or its supply side platform. So I want you guys to remember that flowchart of the programmatic ecosystem that we talked about. So publishers get in touch with their supply side platform. The supply side platform then passes on the information through the exchange to the demand side platforms. On individual demand side platforms, advertisers then place their bids. The auction takes place and the highest bid wins the impression. This process is called real-time bidding because every time you refresh your website, the auction happens. This entire process takes place, like I've told you earlier. The process takes place really fast, at a speed faster than the time you take to blink your eye, and the right impressions are delivered to the user who's loaded the site. So that's what an open auction is. It's very similar to the auction that we discussed earlier in this course. Next is a private auction or a private marketplace or PMP. What happens here is the publisher, instead of giving all their inventory out into the open auction, hosts a private auction where only certain players are invited to bid. So let's say the publisher has 10 premium advertisers. It could invite those 10 premium advertisers into a private auction and tell them that, well, this is inventory that only 10 of you can bid on. You guys can bid on it. The auction takes place. Whoever wins the auction will get their ad to show. Since it's a private auction, the publisher here gets to offer premium inventory to its select premium advertisers and also charge them a slightly higher price. How do the systems know which advertisers are eligible to take part in the private auction? Well, this happens through the deal ID. So the deal ID that we talked about earlier is given by the publisher to those select advertisers. They would enter the deal ID into their DSPs. The deal ID would then identify the deal and help them bid in that invitation-only auction. Right, so that's a private marketplace or a private auction. As of now, I'm just giving you the fundamentals of how it works. In future lessons, we'll talk about the pros and cons of each one of these from an advertiser perspective. Right, for now, let's just stick to understanding the concepts of what these are and how they work. So now that we've looked at private auctions, let's see how they compare with the third type of programmatic advertising, which is a preferred deal. So the private auction, as we discussed, is a publisher inviting a select group of advertisers into an invitation-only auction where they bid on that inventory, and whoever wins the auction gets their ad to show. In a preferred deal, which is the third type of programmatic advertising, what happens is the publisher strikes a deal with just one advertiser here, as against a private auction where they invite multiple advertisers. Here the deal is struck with just one advertiser. So this is a one-to-one deal with no auction happening. A fixed price for the inventory is set. So let's say they set a fixed $5 CPM. The advertiser is then issued a deal ID. The advertiser can go to their DSP, enter the deal ID, and buy the inventory for a fixed $5 CPM without any competition in an auction. The only thing to note here is that the inventory is not guaranteed. The price is guaranteed, the volume is not. So though the advertiser has access to the inventory at a $5 CPM, there is no guarantee from either side. The advertiser is not guaranteeing to buy a fixed set or number of impressions. The publisher too has not guaranteed that they would receive a fixed number of impressions, which is why it's sometimes called a UFR, or an unreserved fixed rate. So the rate is fixed, but the inventory is not reserved or guaranteed. Which brings us to the fourth type of programmatic advertising, which is a PG deal or a programmatic guaranteed deal. In this case, the publisher and the advertiser strike a one-to-one deal, and here both the price and the volume are fixed. So they strike a deal saying the advertiser would buy 1 million impressions for the publisher in this time period at a fixed rate of, let's say, a $15 CPM. Again, the publisher creates the deal, gives the deal ID to the advertiser. The advertiser will put this deal ID into their demand-side platform and have access to the inventory, which is both a fixed price and volume. Right, so let's summarize what we've just seen. Let's compare the open auction or real-time bidding versus private auction or a private marketplace versus a preferred deal versus a programmatic guaranteed deal. So in the open auction, you have hundreds of buyers competing in an auction, the dynamics of which we discussed in an earlier lesson. The auctions are second price auctions. The winning bidder would get their ad to show. Private auctions are invitation-only auctions where a certain number of advertisers are invited by a publisher to have access to their inventory. The price is negotiated. There's a minimum price, or what we call a floor price, that's decided. So the publisher would tell all advertisers that the floor price for the auction is $3 for CPM. Each advertiser would bid above that. The auction would take place, the same second price auction, and the winning bidder would get their ad to show. Volumes here are non-guaranteed. With preferred deals, there is no auction. It's a one-on-one deal struck between the publisher and the advertiser, where the price is negotiated and fixed, but the volume is non-guaranteed. The last one, which is programmatic guaranteed deals, again, it's a one-on-one deal between the publisher and the advertiser, where both the price is fixed and the volume is reserved or guaranteed. The last three are deal ID based. In all the last three types, the publisher would give a deal ID or a deal identifier to the advertiser, which they can then enter into their DSP and buy the inventory. Right, great guys. So that's the four different types of programmatic advertising. I hope you enjoyed learning about them. In the following lessons, I will take you through, like I said, the pros and cons of each type. And as an advertiser, when should you pick what type? See you in the next lesson. Welcome back. In the previous lesson, we talked about the different types of programmatic advertising. Now, before we go ahead and understand the pros and cons of each, it's important for you to know the concept of something called the publisher waterfall. The publisher waterfall is a term for how publishers prioritize their ad inventory. Before we understand that prioritization model, it's important for you to know what premium inventory is. Now, premium inventory and non-premium inventory are terms that you'd keep hearing in the programmatic advertising space. So when publishers mention the term premium inventory, what does that really mean? Well, so premium inventory is basically publisher inventory that would drive high impact and be extremely valuable to advertisers. Common examples of this premium inventory would be roadblocks, mastheads, homepage takeovers, and other similar high-impact units. Now, some of you might not be familiar with what these roadblocks, mastheads, and homepage takeovers are. So let me show you some examples of these. The best example of a masthead would be the YouTube masthead. So if you open YouTube either on the desktop or on your mobile devices, and if you're in a country where YouTube sells its masthead inventory, you'd see an ad here, which would remain the same for a 24-hour period. So this ad unit is sold to just one brand for a period of 24 hours, generally from midnight to midnight. Now this is truly high impact inventory. The reach would vary from country to country, but in India, where I live, the reach is about 100 million people in a day, and it's about 1 billion impressions. That's how big it is, and that's why it's called a high impact ad unit. So this is an example of premium inventory. So let's take another example. Let's go to this website called Times of India. Now, before the site loads, you see this ad here. It says timesofindia.com will load in a few seconds. This ad that you see before the site loads is something called a roadblock. It is high impact again, because it's something a user would definitely see before they move on to site. And this ad that you see on the screen now is what you call a homepage takeover. You'd see the entire homepage taken over by the same brand. So those were some examples of roadblocks, mastheads, and homepage takeovers. So now you know what these are and why they're called high impact ad units, because they give advertisers massive reach and visibility. Now that you know what premium inventory is, let's move on to understand what we called earlier the publisher waterfall. It's also sometimes called the daisy chain. It's nothing but the way in which publishers prioritize their ad inventory. An ad server, for those of you who are not familiar, is just a software that helps publishers prioritize their inventory, manage ads on their websites, as well as track the ad performance. So when you load a publisher website, the ad server would first look for any direct deals that have been done between the publisher and any advertiser. A direct deal are deals that are done offline without going through any programmatic advertising platforms. This is the old way of digital advertising that we talked about in an earlier lesson, where advertisers and publishers close the deal offline and everything is done without really using any programmatic platforms. The reason publishers continue to do this is because they can charge a lot more on inventory sold directly, which is why this is given the first priority. Always remember, this process tries to ensure that publishers make the most money from their digital assets. If there are direct deals available, then the inventory that was promised to the direct deal is given away. Next, the ad server checks if there were any programmatic guaranteed deals. We talked about programmatic guaranteed in the previous lesson. This is basically a deal that is struck offline, but the ads are delivered through the programmatic ecosystem. The inventory here is guaranteed and the price is fixed. Since the publisher can sell a large volume of inventory at a predefined price, this is a second priority for them. Whatever inventory has been committed to a PG deal is given away here. Next, the ad server checks if there are any preferred deals that have been done. Preferred deals, like we discussed in the previous lesson, are deals where the advertiser and the publisher negotiate a fixed price, but do not guarantee each other on the volume that would be bought or sold. Since the publisher does not have any guarantee on the volume here, this is given priority only after direct deals and programmatic guaranteed deals. So advertisers who have a preferred deal would now have access to inventory that has not already been consumed by the direct deal or by the programmatic guaranteed deal. Once the preferred deals in the system, if there were any, are executed, the ad server would then check for private auctions. So the inventory that has not been sold yet is then given out to the private auction, where a certain set of advertisers who already struck a deal with the publisher now bid, and the winning bidder then gets their ad to show. After all this is done, whatever inventory is left is then passed on to the open auction. So the open auctions, you must remember, almost always get what we call remnant inventory, or what most publishers prefer calling non-premium because they don't like using the word remnant. So you'd see both these terms being used in the industry. So either non-premium inventory or remnant inventory is what is available to the open auction. So this process is called the publisher waterfall, and it's important for you to keep these in mind, because in the next lessons, when we talk about the pros and cons of the different types of programmatic advertising, what you've learned in this lesson will help you. Now this entire process takes place in just about 200 milliseconds. It takes you 300 milliseconds to blink your eye. So in a time period faster than the time it takes you to blink your eye, the publisher ad server completes its entire process. It first looks for direct deals, gives the committed inventory there, then checks for PG deals, then preferred deals, then private auctions, and finally the open auction. Today, some publishers also use another process to have their ad inventory sold, which is something called header bidding. In header bidding, instead of the inventory being given away step by step like you see here, it is done simultaneously through a tech-heavy process. The concept of header bidding is beyond the scope of this course. And as an advertiser or a marketer, you wouldn't really need to know too much about it. But if you're really interested, I'd suggest looking up Google or YouTube for it. So that's the concept of the publisher waterfall. Keep this in mind for the next lesson, and I'll see you there. Welcome to this lesson on the pros and cons of the open auction. Before we move further into the lesson, a quick recap of what an open auction is. Like we've discussed earlier, an open auction is that real-time bidding process where you have an auction with multiple publishers, multiple advertisers bidding on the ad inventory. It's a second price auction, and the winning bidder would have their ad displayed. We also saw in the previous lesson on the publisher waterfall that open auctions are the last priority when it comes to publisher ad servers. So let's look at the advantages of the open auction. The first one is setting up an open auction is much easier compared to the other types of programmatic advertising. You don't really need to get in touch with a publisher. You don't have to strike a deal. You can just head to your DSP, create a new campaign just like you would do on, let's say, the Google Ads platform, set your targeting, upload your creatives, and you could be up and running in no time. Unlike other types of programmatic advertising, which have some level of human negotiations involved, open auctions are completely driven by the system. Next is with open auctions, you've got multiple powerful targeting options. So for those of you who are familiar with Google Ads, you have multiple targeting options there. You can target by geography, by age, by gender. You have something called in-market audiences. You've got affinity audiences. You've got custom intent and custom affinity audiences. With programmatic platforms like DoubleClick, you have all these with access to a lot more options. You have access to third-party data that we talked about in an earlier lesson. You can now target audiences based on data available in these third-party data sets, which you can't do with standard display advertising. You can reach audiences here irrespective of the site they're on. So let's say you're a real estate company and you want to go after people who are looking to buy a home. The system would automatically find those people and show your ads to them irrespective of the site they're on. Right? So you get to be in front of your audiences wherever they are on the internet, and you don't have to worry about choosing specific placements. So these are some advantages of the open auction. Coming to the disadvantages, the biggest disadvantage of open auction is that you only get access to remnant or non-premium inventory. We talked about this when we discussed the publisher waterfall. We said that publisher ad servers prioritize open auctions last. So the inventory that you have here is what's in reality left over after all the other deals have been completed. Open auctions are most prone to ad fraud. We talked about ad fraud in detail in an earlier lesson. And we also said that since in the open auctions you have thousands of ad networks, ad exchanges, and some of them might not be reliable or have stringent enough standards for their publisher partners, the chances of ad fraud happening in the open auction is much, much higher. Brand safety is also a concern here. We talked about brand safety in an earlier lesson as well. Since in the open auction, your ads are going to show to your audience irrespective of the site they're on, it could also potentially show in content environments that your brand does not want to be associated with. And there's also a lack of transparency. Again, because there are way too many players in the ecosystem and it's completely unregulated. Transparency in pricing is a problem. You would never know what the actual price of the inventory really was, and you wouldn't even know what kind of markup you've been charged. So these are some of the disadvantages of open auctions. Coming to when you should and shouldn't use open auctions, here are some scenarios where open auctions would work. The first is when you're currently doing ads on the Google Display Network through Google Ads, and you want to access a lot more inventory than what's available there. You could choose the open auction type of programmatic advertising. Next, if you want access to more powerful targeting, if you want access to all those third-party data sets that are available on the programmatic platforms, you could use open auctions as well. And ideally, you would use open auctions only when you have adequate ad fraud detection and brand safety measures in place, because we already saw one of the biggest disadvantages of open auctions is that the chance of ad fraud and brand safety issues happening there is much higher. Where the open auction would not work is one, when you want more premium inventory. Let's say you want to target a homepage ad unit, or you are looking for a homepage takeover, mastheads, roadblocks. All this inventory you would almost never get through an open auction. What you get in the open auction is most often inventory that's on inner pages of a publisher site, inventory that's way below the fold, for example. The second thing is, like I said earlier, if you don't have strong ad fraud and brand safety mechanisms in place, the open auction is something you'd try and stay away from. Great, so that's the end of this lesson. You now know the advantages and the disadvantages of the open auction type of programmatic advertising. You also know when you would choose to use it. In the next lesson, we'll talk about private auctions. See you in that one. Hello and welcome to this lesson on the pros and cons of private auctions. Before we move further, a quick recap of what private auctions are. Like we discussed earlier, you have a few select advertisers who a certain publisher has struck a deal with, where before the inventory is opened up to the open auction, these select advertisers can bid on it. In a private auction, the floor price for the private auction is pre-negotiated. So let's say in this case, the floor price is $1.50. The advertisers are given a deal ID by the publisher, which is like their invitation card to the auction. The auction then takes place. It's a standard second price auction. The winning advertiser would then get their ad to show. So that was a quick recap. Let's move on to understand the advantages of private auction. The first advantage of a private auction is that it has more premium inventory as compared to open auctions. If you remember the publisher waterfall, you saw the open auctions were the last priority and private auctions were last but one. So with private auctions, you get access to slightly more premium inventory as compared to open auctions. Second is you have an opportunity to purchase this inventory before it ends up on the open market. So let's say you have access to a private auction. You can then buy inventory that your competitors in the open auction would never have access to. You have powerful targeting options. So all the powerful targeting options that we talked about when discussing the open auction are applicable to private auctions as well. Instead of using the targeting options on remnant inventory in the open auction, you could use the same powerful targeting on more premium inventory here. And last is you could have and build better relationships with key publishers. Since private auctions require manual negotiations before striking a deal, you could build a strong relationship with key publishers whose inventory is very valuable to you. And later on, you could even strike better, let's say, preferred deals or programmatic guaranteed deals with them. So those are the advantages of the private auction. Let's look at the other side. One of the disadvantages of the private auction is that it's only partly automated. Unlike open auctions where you have no manual deals to be struck, you don't have to speak to multiple publishers. In the private auction, you would need to do that. So it does require some manual effort to strike the right deals and get invitations to the most relevant auctions. The inventory here is non-guaranteed. So though you have access to the inventory, there is no guarantee you'd get it because you're going through an auction process after all. There's no guarantee you would win the auction. The adoption of private auctions is still kind of limited as compared to preferred deals and programmatic guaranteed deals. Private auctions haven't caught up as much. And the prices here are higher as compared to open auctions, though they're still reasonable. So if you're an advertiser with a strict performance goal, you'd have a better chance of achieving those performance goals with private auctions as compared to, let's say, a programmatic guaranteed deal. Keep this last point in mind because we'll come back to this when we're talking about the pros and cons of programmatic guaranteed deal. So when would you and would you not use a private auction? One of the scenarios where private auctions would work for you is when you want access to higher quality inventory before it ends up in the open market. So like I said earlier, let's say you want to stay one step ahead of your competitors and you know a lot of your competitors are buying inventory in the open auction. Through private auctions, you can buy it before they even see it. Private auctions also help you target specific audiences on that inventory. So you get access to that inventory, you can bid on it in the private auction, and you can also layer additional powerful targeting options on it to ensure that you're reaching audiences that are most relevant to you. Let's look at some scenarios where the private auction would not work. One is when you want more premium inventory. Let's say you want mastheads or roadblocks. In this case, you would not be able to use a private auction because like we said in the publisher waterfall, private auctions are given the last but one priority. The other scenario where private auctions wouldn't work for you is when you want a fixed price for the inventory. In private auctions, like we said, it's an auction with a pre-negotiated base price. So you know what the base price is and you know you have to bid over it, but you have no clue what your competitors are bidding, because as we discussed in one of the early lessons, the auctions here are blind auctions. You don't know what anyone else in the auction is bidding. So there's no guarantee that you'd win the auction, and your price would keep varying depending on the competition within the private auction. Right? So we've looked at the pros and cons of private auctions and when you should and shouldn't use it. In the next lesson, we'll talk about the pros and cons of preferred deals. I'll see you in that one. Hello and welcome to this lesson on the pros and cons of preferred deals. A quick recap of what preferred deals are. In a preferred deal, you have a publisher who struck a deal with a single advertiser. The deal sets a fixed price for the inventory that the publisher has decided to sell to the advertiser. Though the price is fixed, the volume is not guaranteed. So the advertiser can choose to buy the inventory. That's why preferred deals are sometimes also called UFR, which is unreserved fixed rate. With that recap, let's look at some advantages of preferred deals. The first advantage is you get access to unique premium differentiated inventory. If you remember the publisher waterfall, preferred deals come just after direct deals and programmatic guarantee. So you get inventory that's much more premium than what you would get either through private auctions or through open auctions. As an advertiser, preferred deals also give you more flexibility. You can strike multiple preferred deals with different publishers. You can run campaigns across all these different publisher sites. And if you see a certain campaign is not performing, you can move budgets out of it. And if a certain campaign is performing really well, you can move budgets to it. This flexibility in moving around your budgets is not possible with the programmatic guaranteed deal type, because there you reserved a certain amount of inventory and you've committed to buying it. With preferred deals, you have a lot more flexibility. You also have all the powerful targeting options that we discussed earlier for open auctions and private auctions. The only difference is here you can apply that powerful targeting to more premium inventory. In open auctions, you could apply it to remnant inventory. In private auctions, you could apply it to inventory that was slightly more premium than the open auction. And when it comes to preferred deals, you can layer all those powerful targeting options on inventory that's more premium than both private and open auctions. The other advantage of preferred deals is that they're more efficient. You only need to ideally strike a deal with a publisher once, and this deal can then be reused for subsequent campaigns, assuming, of course, that the terms remain the same. So you don't have to go and strike a deal every time you want to use the inventory. You could strike a deal once, and you could exercise the option to buy the inventory at that fixed price whenever you want to. The disadvantages of preferred deals are, one, you don't have a guarantee on the inventory. So if you're running a big bang campaign where you've got massive reach targets to meet, there is no guarantee you'll get it here, because there is a chance that the publisher would have committed this inventory to some other programmatic guaranteed deal that they struck with another advertiser. Remember that here only the price is fixed, the inventory is not guaranteed. And it's more manual as compared to open or private auctions. It requires manual interactions, requires negotiations to fix the price. So it is more time consuming to get started as compared to the other types that we've discussed so far. So when should you pick preferred deals over other types and when should you not? Preferred deals would work when you want to access higher quality inventory before it ends up on the open market at a fixed price. That's the most important thing here, is you can buy inventory before your competitors do at a pre-negotiated price. The other scenario where preferred deals would work really well is when you're running performance campaigns with a goal that is lead generation or sales. In this case, you get access to premium inventory at a fixed price with powerful targeting controls to reach the most relevant audience. So you can reach audiences that would most likely buy your products through premium placements on the publisher site. In which case would a preferred deal not really work? Well, when you're doing a big bang campaign, let's say you've got a massive campaign that you want to run over 2 or 3 days, and you want to reach a large audience in that short period, you would most likely need guaranteed inventory. With a preferred deal, your inventory would not be guaranteed. So in this case, there's a chance that you might not be able to meet your reach target. In such a scenario where you have a large campaign for brand awareness, programmatic guaranteed deals would work best. And that's what we talk about in the next lesson, which is on the pros and cons of programmatic guaranteed. Hello and welcome to this lesson on the pros and cons of programmatic guaranteed. A quick recap. Programmatic guaranteed deals are deals struck between a single advertiser and a publisher where both the price and the volume are pre-negotiated. So the publisher guarantees a certain number of impressions to the advertiser at a fixed CPM. So what are the advantages of programmatic guaranteed or PG deals? One is you have access to premium ad inventory. Again, if you remember the publisher waterfall that we talked about before we moved on to the pros and cons of the different types of programmatic advertising, we saw that programmatic guaranteed is the second highest priority just after direct deals. So this gives you access to some of the most premium inventory that the publisher would have. You have guaranteed inventory at a predefined CPM. The CPM is lower than direct, but higher than preferred deals, private auctions, or open auctions. The key thing to remember here is the price is lower than what you would get when you do a direct deal with the publisher. Some of you might be wondering, why is the price lower for a programmatic guaranteed deal as compared to a direct deal? Well, that's because programmatic guaranteed deals automate a lot of the ad delivery and tracking process. In direct deals, since they are being executed outside of the programmatic ecosystem, it would require a lot of bandwidth from the publisher's ad sales team first to negotiate the deal, and then the ad ops team to execute the deal. With programmatic platforms, the execution becomes much easier, and which is why the CPMs are lower than what you would get with a direct deal. Improved brand safety and transparency is another key advantage of PG deals. We talked about brand safety earlier, and we said how it impacts open auctions the most. With guaranteed deals, since you know exactly which site your ads are going to show, and in most cases you also know which units on which site, there's virtually no chance of a brand safety issue cropping up. There is also minimal ad fraud risk because you're striking a one-to-one deal with a specific publisher. So unlike other types of programmatic advertising, ad fraud risk is the least with programmatic guaranteed deals. The disadvantages of PG deals are first, it's technically not programmatic as adding most targeting layers is not possible. Unlike other types of programmatic advertising where you can layer multiple powerful targeting options on the publisher's inventory, with PG deals, that kind of layering is quite restricted, which is a prime reason why programmatic guaranteed deals do not work well for performance campaigns in most cases. So if you want to run a performance campaign where your goal is to get sales, get leads on your site, you'd rather pick a preferred deal, for example, as you can get access to premium inventory and layer additional targeting options on that to ensure that you get ROI from your performance campaigns. With PG deals, since your targeting layers are limited, the performance might not be up to your expectations. The other problem with programmatic guaranteed deals is mid-flight optimization is not possible. Though you can speak to the publisher and stop the campaign if it's not working, you can't really optimize it yourself midway like you would do with any other type of programmatic advertising. So now that we've seen the pros and cons of PG deals, let's look at some scenarios where you would use it. The best scenario for PG deals is when you want guaranteed access to premium inventory at a predefined fixed price. So you can get access to, let's say, a roadblock on a publisher's site. You get it at a fixed price, and they also guarantee that you would get a certain number of impressions, for example. This kind of buy works best for large brand campaigns when you want to reach a large audience in a short period, and you want to ensure that your inventory is guaranteed. With all other types of programmatic advertising, your inventory is not guaranteed. In the auction, there is no guarantee you'd win the auction, whether it's an open or a private auction. With preferred deals as well, there's no guarantee that you would get the inventory because you're only fixing the price there and you're not guaranteeing the inventory. So whenever you have a big bang brand campaign, that's a great scenario to use programmatic guaranteed deals. Like we discussed just a little while back, programmatic guaranteed deals do not really work with performance campaigns. So keep that in mind if you have a performance campaign that you want to run. PG deals might not be the best choice for you. Great, so now we've looked at the pros and cons of all the 4 types of programmatic advertising. Now you know the advantages of each, the disadvantages of each. You also know which one to pick in which scenario. That brings us to the end of this lesson. Look forward to seeing you in the next one. Hello and welcome back to the course on programmatic advertising. In this section, we talk about the Google programmatic ecosystem. I'm sure all of you remember this programmatic advertising flowchart that we discussed in one of the early lessons. Now let's look at how Google products cater to this ecosystem. The Google programmatic ecosystem was earlier called DoubleClick, and all products were branded with DoubleClick. This has changed of late, and a few minutes from now, I will take you through all the old names and all the new names after the rebranding has happened. But let's understand what you see on the screen at the moment. On one side, you have the marketer, which is the demand side. On the other side, you have the publisher, which is the supply side. Let's look at the demand side first. Marketers have access to something called an ad server. This is nothing but a software or a tool where marketers can upload their ad creatives and run, monitor, and track campaigns across multiple publishers and platforms. The Google Ad Server for the demand side is called DoubleClick Campaign Manager, or just DCM. There is also another platform called DoubleClick Search, which helps advertisers run ads across different search platforms, including Google, Yahoo, Bing, and Baidu. Google also has a creative tool for marketers called DoubleClick Studio, which helps make rich media creatives. And then there's the demand side platform, which is DoubleClick Bid Manager, or DBM. On the supply side, the publisher has their ad server, which we discussed earlier when we talked about the publisher waterfall. This ad server helps prioritize their inventory. It also helps them manage, monitor, and measure ads that are being served on their digital properties. DoubleClick for publishers here does the dual job of being the ad server as well as the supply side platform. DBM and DFP interact with each other through the ad exchange, which is called the DoubleClick Ad Exchange, or AdX. So these are the different products in the Google programmatic ecosystem. Let's recap each one here. So we talked about DCM, or DoubleClick Campaign Manager, which is the advertiser's ad server. It helps them with storing their ad creatives, tracking, and measurement. There is DBM, or DoubleClick Bid Manager, which is Google's demand side platform. It helps advertisers purchase inventory across different publisher sites. There's DoubleClick Search, which is a third-party search engine marketing platform. It helps advertisers buy inventory across Google, Yahoo, Bing, and Baidu. DoubleClick Studio helps advertisers create rich media ad formats and also measure engagement on those ad formats. And we've got the Google Analytics 360 suite, which is advanced analytics for marketers. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Google Analytics, or GA. GA 360 is one step above that, with a lot of advanced analytics and additional personalization features. Well, we've seen all the old names so far, which have the DoubleClick brand on them. But like I told you in an earlier lesson, in July 2018, Google retired the DoubleClick brand, and all these products now have new names. Both the old names and new names are used in the industry today, so you should be familiar with both. So DoubleClick Bid Manager, which is the demand side platform, is now called Google Display and Video 360, or just DV360. DoubleClick Search, which helps advertisers run ads across different search networks, is now called Search Ads 360. DoubleClick Campaign Manager, or DCM, is now just called Campaign Manager. DoubleClick Studio, which helps marketers make rich media creatives, is just called Studio now. And DoubleClick for publishers, which is the publisher ad server and supply side platform, is now called Google Ad Manager. So this is a ready reckoner for you for all the old and new names in the Google programmatic ecosystem. Keep these in mind because, as I said, people still use both interchangeably. The Google ecosystem has access to most major ad exchanges. So if you look at the top ad exchanges globally, Programmatic, Rubicon are some of the top names, so is AppNexus. The Google Ad Exchange has access to these as well, apart from, of course, its own publisher inventory, which is on Google Ad Manager, and inventory on YouTube as well. Another thing that you should be aware of when we talk about the Google programmatic ecosystem is Google Marketing Platform, or GMP. GMP is a suite of Google products which have been designed and put together to help marketers improve their overall marketing efficiency and ROI. So what does the GMP include? It includes Google Display and Video 360, which is the demand side platform, Search Ads 360, which helps you run ads across multiple search networks, Analytics 360, which is an advanced version of Google Analytics, a lot more additional features, a lot more personalization. There's Google Data Studio, which is a tool that helps you make reporting dashboards. Google Optimize 360, which helps you A/B test and optimize your landing pages. Google Surveys 360, which helps you run consumer surveys. And Google Tag Manager 360, which is an advanced version of Google Tag Manager. I'd suggest you go and check out these products to understand more in detail about them. I'll share the link to GMP in the resources section of this lesson. So this brings us to the end of this lesson on the Google programmatic ecosystem. Look forward to seeing you in the next one. Hello and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we look at the difference between programmatic advertising and standard display advertising on the Google Display Network. We'll compare the two across different criteria. We look at inventory, ad formats, the technology, the bidding process, the optimization algorithm, audience targeting, and first-party cookie integration. Let's look at the first one, which is inventory access. So the programmatic platforms, which are Campaign Manager and Google Display and Video 360, have access to AdX, which is the Google Ad Exchange, and 76 other exchanges as well. In the previous lesson, we saw that the Google ecosystem has access to some of the key exchanges like AppNexus, Programmatic, and Rubicon. And there are over 75 exchanges that the Google ecosystem has access to. The display network, on the other hand, has access to only the Google Ad Exchange. So basically, programmatic advertising opens up your world to a lot more inventory that you would not have access to when you're only doing campaigns on the Google Display Network. When it comes to ad formats, with programmatic, you have access to banner ads, video, mobile, native ads, and dynamic creatives. With GDN, you have access to text ads, so you can't do text ads with the Campaign Manager or Display Video 360 at the moment, though you can do it through Search Ads 360. GDN also has access to responsive ad formats. So those of you who are not familiar, responsive ad formats are a format where you upload different elements of your creative, and system will automatically create your banner ads to fit different ad sizes. The key thing to note here is that with programmatic advertising platforms, you'll have access to a lot more interesting creative options, especially real-time creative, that you will not be able to do with the Google Display Network. In fact, in a later section, when we talk about programmatic advertising success stories, you'd see how some brands have used real-time creative to make their brand campaigns more engaging and to get better results from their campaigns. From the technology aspect, with programmatic, you have both the auction, which is RTB or real-time bidding, as well as programmatic direct. Now, programmatic direct is an umbrella term used for private auctions, preferred deals, and programmatic guaranteed deals. With GDN, you can only access inventory through the open auction. There are no preferred deals or programmatic guaranteed deals available through the Google Display Network. So if you want all the access to all the premium inventory that we talked about, you will need to either contact the publishers directly or use programmatic platform. When it comes to bidding in the auctions, with programmatic platforms, you can bid on impressions. So you have a CPM bid, which is a cost per thousand impression bid. You can also optimize for certain actions or clicks. So you have a CPA, which is a cost per action or cost per acquisition optimization. You also have a cost per click optimization. You can also bid cost per view or CPV when you're running video campaigns. With GDN today, apart from the CPM and CPV bids, you can also bid for clicks with a CPA, which is a cost per acquisition, or an ROAS, which is a return on ad spend optimization. So to some extent, in some specific cases, the GDN tends to work better for direct response or performance campaigns. That doesn't mean you can't do it on programmatic platforms. You can do it on programmatic platforms and see results there as well. Coming to the next one, which is the algorithm that optimizes for a specific action that the advertiser chooses. The algorithm used by Campaign Manager and DV360 have about 40 variables, while the GDN currently uses something called a conversion optimizer, which takes into account over 100 signals. Another reason why I said that sometimes performance campaigns tend to work better on the display network. So if you're doing a campaign that's absolutely bottom of the marketing funnel, GDN might tend to work better. Coming to the targeting options, on programmatic, you can do remarketing, which is basically targeting your own first-party cookies, people who visited your website, people who've interacted with you in the past. You can target Google audience data, which is demographics. So you can target by age, by gender, by affinity and in-market audience segments. You can also target customer match. Customer match is when you upload your email IDs of your customers to the platform. The platform will then match the email IDs you uploaded with the login email IDs on record, find those customers for you, and you can target them on the platform. Programmatic platforms also have access to DMPs and third-party data providers. A DMP is a data management platform. What a DMP does is it collects data and then packages it into segments that can be used by the advertiser. This gives you access to a lot more data that you can use for targeting, and you wouldn't have these options on GDN. So on GDN, you can do remarketing, you can use Google audience data, you can also use customer match, but you don't have access to data management platforms and third-party data providers, which gives you additional data layers that you can use for your targeting. That's a big advantage, again, of programmatic platforms, is the ability to use third-party data to reach your audiences. Coming to the last one, which is integrating your first-party cookies with the platforms. In the case of the Google programmatic ecosystem, it's integrated with DoubleClick Campaign Manager, DoubleClick Search, and GAP, which is Google Analytics Premium. Google Analytics Premium has now rebranded and it's now called Google Analytics 360. You can also import your Google Ad cookies to DoubleClick Bid Manager or DV360 as it's now called. On the Google Display Network, you can integrate with DoubleClick Search and Google Analytics, the free version of Google Analytics. You can also import your DoubleClick audiences to AdWords. Right, so just to summarize, the biggest advantages of programmatic over standard display is the fact that you have a lot more inventory. You can use real-time creative. You can access premium inventory through programmatic guaranteed deals and preferred deals. And you also have access to third-party data. Great, guys. So that should give you a good overview of programmatic versus display. I'm sure a lot of you might have this question on what really is the difference between running ads on a programmatic platform versus running ads on the Google Display Network. So here are some of the key differences. On the inventory front, I told you that programmatic platforms, especially the Google programmatic ecosystem, has a lot more inventory than you'd ever get from just the Google Display Network. So here's a helpful analogy to keep in mind when it comes to inventory. If this is the inventory available on Google Display and Video 360, then this is the inventory on GDN. Right? Like we said, GDN is just the Google Ad Exchange inventory, while Google Display and Video 360, which is the programmatic demand-side platform, has access to over 75 ad exchanges. So that's a useful analogy to keep in mind. And that's the end of this lesson. I hope you're now clear on the differences between programmatic advertising and the display network. And I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome to this section on programmatic advertising success stories. In this section, we look at case studies on how different brands have leveraged programmatic advertising to their advantage. We look at success stories that will show you the true power of programmatic advertising. So let's get started with the first one, which is on how two brands, Adidas and McDonald's, used data-driven creative to drive better marketing results. What I want you to do before going further in this lesson is head to the resources section. You'll find this in the menu bar on your left as you're watching this video. Click on it, you'd find links to two videos. The first one is a case study from Adidas, the second one from McDonald's. So go ahead, watch those two videos, and then come back and continue with this lesson. I will take you through the case studies and explain them to you. So go ahead, watch the videos and come back. Great guys, I hope you watched both those videos. If you've not, please do them. Otherwise, this explanation of the case study will not really make sense to you. So the challenge that the team at Adidas was facing in this case was that something called banner blindness was impacting their brand engagement. Now, some of you might be familiar with what banner blindness is, but for those of you who are not familiar, banner blindness is a phenomenon of users getting so used to seeing ads that they start ignoring them. Right? Think about it. All of us browse the internet, we all get targeted by ads, and our minds have somehow started tuning off when we see ads because we know it's an ad and we focus more on the content that we're trying to read or watch. Banner blindness is a problem with digital advertising, and that's something that advertisers and marketers are trying to overcome. And that's exactly what Adidas did here in this particular case study. They found a solution in the programmatic ecosystem. What they did was they went to the DV360 platform. So DV360, as you guys will remember, is the Google Display and Video 360 platform. It was earlier called DoubleClick Bid Manager. It's basically the demand-side platform for advertisers in the Google programmatic ecosystem. They then used Studio, which was earlier called DoubleClick Studio, to create real-time creatives. So they just used 4 creative templates, which Studio then used to create about 300 customized banner ads. Now, whenever the target audience was watching the game, they would get targeted with ads that were absolutely relevant to that moment. What this did was it created a more relevant user experience because the ads were not those usual banners that you'd see, but was something that was absolutely relevant to something the user was already experiencing. This helped drive better engagement for the brand, increased the viewability of the ads by 1.7 times, and also resulted in a 3-time increase in click-through rates on the ads. So people were paying more attention to the ads, clicking on them as well. And this was made possible by the programmatic ecosystem, which allowed them to create real-time data-driven creative. So that's the first case study. The second one was from McDonald's. Here, the challenge that they were facing was that there were too many new food delivery services in Hong Kong, and they wanted to cut through the clutter and make their ads for McDonald's delivery visible to the target audience. What they did here was they used the audience insights feature on Display Video 360 to segment audiences into different groups. And they then used real-time triggers from the football match that was being watched to deliver personalized messages to specific audience segments. The impact again here was massive. The ads helped them set a new single-day record for McDelivery sales. They clocked about 170,000 orders in a 4-week period. They also saw a 30% increase in click-through rates on their ads. Right, so these were two excellent case studies on how a brand can use the programmatic ecosystem to build real-time data-driven creative that you would not be able to do through conventional digital advertising. In the next lesson, we'll talk about another very interesting success story. Look forward to seeing you in that one. Welcome back to the second case study on programmatic advertising. In this one, we'll talk about how programmatic can help you with advanced measurement. So like you did in the previous lesson, I want you to head back to the resources section on the left, click on the link to the case study, watch that video, and then come back and join this lesson. Great guys, hope you've gone and watched that video. So let's look at what the brand did here. The challenge they were facing was that they were not able to measure the impact of digital advertising campaigns on cars being purchased in showrooms offline. So what they did here was after the cars were bought, they sent a message to people who bought the car. And this message, which was sent either through SMS or through email, had a link to a landing page. So it could have been something like a message that said, "Thank you for your purchase. Leave us some feedback on the entire experience that you had," something on those lines. So when people clicked on that link, they would get on the landing page. This landing page had a conversion code added to it. The conversion code was generated by the programmatic advertising platform, which in this case was Campaign Manager. The code would then check if this person who had now bought the car and come to this page had viewed or interacted with any digital ad in the past. This then helped them find that more than 70% of car purchases offline were actually influenced by digital advertising. So earlier when they were having trouble calculating the ROI of digital advertising, now it made their job easier because they could more easily connect purchases happening offline with their online campaigns. And again, this was made possible through the programmatic ecosystem. So that's a very interesting case study on how programmatic can help you with advanced measurement. In the next lesson, we look at another very interesting case study, this time on how a brand used programmatic guaranteed for better reach. Look forward to seeing you in that lesson. Welcome back. In this lesson, we'll talk about our third case study, which is on how a brand drove additional reach with programmatic guaranteed campaigns. So like we've done earlier, again, you can head to the resources section on the left, watch the video, and once you're done with it, you can come back and join this lesson. Great guys, I hope you all watched the video. In this case, the challenge that Samsung was facing was that they were running campaigns through direct deals across different publishers, and their audiences were getting duplicated across different publisher sites. So let's say they were running campaigns across publisher A, B, C, and D. All of them were being run independent of the other, and their audiences were being exposed multiple times across all these publishers, resulting in an overall unnecessary overexposure of the audience. Their budgets were also getting exhausted quicker than they required. In order to solve this problem, they chose to do programmatic guaranteed campaigns. So instead of doing direct deals with these publishers, so if you remember the publisher waterfall that we discussed earlier, direct deals are deals that are done completely offline, without or outside of the programmatic ecosystem. They are delivered outside of the programmatic ecosystem as well. When Samsung chose programmatic guaranteed, what they could do was they could run campaigns across each of these publishers with something called a global frequency cap. So now they could cap their frequency universally to limit overexposure across all publisher sites at the same time. This is something they could not do when they were doing direct deals with the publishers. The impact of this was that now that they were limiting the exposure to their audience, they were able to reach more people for the same budget. If you go back to our lesson where we talked about frequency and frequency capping, for the same budget, if I'm capping my exposure, I now have more impressions left to show it to newer people, right? And that's exactly what happened here. Because they were limiting the exposure to the existing audience, they were able to reach a newer audience. In fact, they reached 4 times the number of unique users that they were doing earlier at 1/4 the cost per user as well. So this is another example of how using programmatic platforms can help advertisers get much better results than what they're getting otherwise. So we've seen 4 different case studies across 3 different use cases in this section. The first one we saw showed you how brands can use programmatic advertising for real-time and data-driven creative. In the second one, we saw how programmatic can help you with advanced measurement. And in this one, we've seen how using programmatic guaranteed campaigns can help you reach a lot more people with the same budget that you have. So I hope you enjoyed these case studies and these success stories, which have given you an idea of how powerful programmatic advertising and programmatic solutions can actually be. I hope you enjoyed this section. I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back to the last section of this programmatic advertising course. We'll quickly review what we've learned and then wrap things up. But first, let me congratulate you on coming this far and completing this course. It's been an exciting journey for me, and I hope it was an exciting journey for you as well. We looked at programmatic advertising in detail. We began with what programmatic advertising is. We then went on to understand the fundamentals of the digital advertising auction. We saw how digital advertising has evolved from the beginning of time to what it is today. You then learned the different components of the programmatic advertising ecosystem. So you now know what DSPs, SSPs, ad networks, and ad exchanges are, where do they fit into the ecosystem, and what do they do. You're also now more comfortable with programmatic advertising terminology. We talked about frequency caps, first, second, and third party data, above the fold and below the fold inventory, and run of network and run of site types of ad buying. We went through brand safety, ad fraud, and the concept of viewability in detail. You learned the different types of programmatic advertising, also the pros and cons of each type. We then went through the Google programmatic ecosystem, saw the different tools that Google has as part of it, and what each tool or platform does. We also saw an overview of the Google marketing platform. We then went on to understand the differences between programmatic advertising and standard display. What are the advantages of programmatic advertising over advertising on the Google Display Network? In which cases would programmatic advertising really help you? And then we saw some really interesting programmatic advertising success stories that would have shown you how powerful programmatic advertising can really get. So I hope you had a great time learning all about programmatic advertising. If you truly enjoyed this course and found it valuable, please do go ahead and leave a review. Reviews mean a lot. In fact, reviews mean everything on a platform like Udemy, and that's how this course will get discovered by other people who could potentially benefit from it. So if you found this course valuable, please do go ahead and leave a review. Thank you so much once again, and I wish you all the best for your digital and programmatic advertising efforts. Bye.